Hello, interested everyone. Welcome to class 12 biology. In our previous video on chapter 13 organisms and populations, we discussed about some major abiotic factors such as light, temperature, water and soil. Right? I told you that variations in these abiotic factors will create different types of habitats. And I also told you that in these different types of habitats, different kinds of organisms are found. Right? In this particular video, we will discuss about responses to abiotic factors by the organisms. How do organisms respond to abiotic factors? Now we know that the variations in abiotic conditions can create different kinds of habitats. And we also know that in a particular habitat, the abiotic conditions, they do not remain constant. They keep on changing from time to time. And abiotic conditions which keep on changing from time to time, if the changes are very drastic, it can be quite stressful for the organisms. Now the question is, how do the organisms living in habitats where abiotic conditions vary drastically in time cope or manage with stressful conditions? Right? It becomes stressful for the organisms because organisms, they try to maintain a state of steady internal condition called as homeostasis. Right? And it's a result of evolution. So due to evolutionary process, the organisms, they have developed a state of steady internal conditions, the conditions at which it can perform its best, the condition at which the metabolic reactions, the physiological functions, they occur with maximum efficiency within the organism. So that particular steady internal state is called as homeostasis. Now the problem over here is the external environmental conditions which keep on changing from time to time, they tend to disrupt or upset this particular homeostasis, and therefore it is quite stressful for the living organisms. And the question is, how do organisms cope with these stressful conditions? Okay. Now let us look at how we human beings, as an organism living in a particular habitat, how do we cope with this changes in the abiotic conditions. There is a situation given in your textbook. It is, suppose a person is able to perform his or her best when the temperature is 25 degrees Celsius, and that person wishes to maintain the temperature at that particular level even when it is very hot or very cold outside. So how does a person do that? A person can do that by using air conditioner in summer and heater in winter, at work, at home, or in a car. Right? So if he or she does that, then his or her performance would be always maximal regardless of the weather around him. So human beings, we can use machines such as air conditioner in summer and heater in winter to maintain our ambient temperature at the level at which we can perform our best. But can other organisms do that? Right? So what about other organisms? How do they cope with changes in abiotic factors? So organisms, they can respond to the changes in external conditions in three different ways, right? And based upon how they respond to the changes in external conditions, they are categorized into three groups: conformers, regulators, and partial regulators. Conformers are those organisms whose internal conditions conform along with the changes in external conditions. Right? So therefore they are called as conformers. If you look at this particular green line, right, the organism's internal condition, they change according to the external condition. So therefore they are called as conformers. And regulators are those organisms who can regulate their internal condition. So therefore they can maintain their internal condition at a constant level regardless of their changes in the external conditions. So therefore they are called as regulators. And then partial regulators are those organisms who conforms with the external environment for till a particular level, and after that they become regulators. Right? So these are the three different ways in which organisms, they can respond to changes in external conditions. Right? And based upon how they respond to the external conditions, right, changes in the external conditions, they are categorized into these three groups: conformers, regulators, and partial regulators. Now let us first look at the regulators. How do they regulate? Now some organisms like birds and mammals, they can maintain their homeostasis, which means they can maintain their own body temperature or osmotic concentrations through physiological or behavioral means. So therefore they are called as regulators, right? And we human beings are also regulators, right? So we maintain our own body temperature or osmotic concentrations through processes called thermoregulation and osmoregulation, right? So through thermoregulation we maintain our body temperature, and through osmoregulation we maintain our body's osmotic concentrations. For example, right, examples of thermoregulation include sweating during summer heat. When it becomes really hot during summer, we sweat profusely, right? So sweating helps in cooling our body, right? So thereby maintaining our body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius, right? So sweating, it cools our body through evaporative cooling. I hope you understand that, right? And during winter, when it gets really cold, we shiver, right? So shivering is a form of exercise which generates body heat, and which also helps in maintaining our body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius. So shivering and sweating are forms of thermoregulation. Okay, so therefore we are regulators. Right. Now, what about organisms who cannot regulate their homeostasis? They are called as conformers. Now, 99% of animals and all plants, they are categorized under conformers group, which means they are organisms who cannot maintain a constant internal environment. Their internal environment changes along with external conditions, and therefore they are called as conformers. Now, there are two questions given in a textbook. It asks why these 99% of animals and all plants, why they do not become regulators. And there is a second question which asks why there are no small animals like shrews and hummingbirds found in polar regions. The answer for the first question is quite simple, right? Thermoregulation and osmoregulation regulators, they spend a lot of energy to regulate their body temperature and osmotic pressure, right? To maintain a constant internal environment, internal body conditions, regulators, they spend a lot of energy. So in order to avoid spending energy, these conformers, they do not become regulators, right? So that is simple answer for that. And for the answer for the second question is small animals, their body surface to their body volume ratio, it is quite large, right? So their surface area is very large compared to their body volume, which means these small animals, they tend to lose more body heat compared to what their body can generate through metabolism, heat that they can generate through metabolism. So therefore they have to spend a lot of energy to generate body heat to compensate for the loss of their heat from their body surface. So therefore there are no small animals found in polar regions. So these are the two questions for which you have to write down the answer. You have to prepare answer for these two questions, right? You can find answers in your textbook, right? So I'm saying these two questions are important because they have been asked in previous board examination. Now, migration is one alternative response shown by organisms to cope with stressful conditions, right? So migration is the process of moving away temporarily from a stressful habitat to a more hospitable area and return later. So that is called as migration. So we have examples such as herd migration of mammals and migration of birds. So in your textbook, it is given that birds which live in Siberia, where it gets really cold in winter, so those birds during winter, they come to places like India, right, to places like Kuladio National Park in India, in Rajasthan, right, where they stay there for winter and then they return to Siberia in summer, right? So that is called as migration, during which they try to cope with the changes in the abiotic conditions of their habitat. So some organisms, when the external environment becomes quite unfavorable, what they do is they reduce their metabolic activity and they enter into a state of dormancy called as suspension. Right, the state of dormancy during stressful conditions is called as suspension, and we have got examples in bacteria, fungi, and lower plants which produce spores. Right, so spores with its hard external covering, it protects the organism from external heat and desiccation. Right, and seeds of higher plants with the seed coat, right, it protects the embryo from heat and desiccation. Right, so when the favorable condition returns, the spores and seeds, they can germinate and give rise to new organism. Right, so that is called as the state of dormancy or suspension for these organisms. And in animals also, when the conditions become quite stressful, they avoid that particular stressful condition by escaping in time. For example, we have got bears, right? When in the winter, when it gets really cold, so the bears, they go into winter sleep known as hibernation. And then we also have got snails and fishes which enter into estivation during summer when it gets really hot and dry. And zooplanktons, they enter into diapause, right, when the external condition becomes quite stressful for them, right? And these are some examples of suspension. Let us now discuss about adaptations, right? So all the responses shown by organisms to their abiotic factors like regulation, conformation, migration, suspension, all these responses are nothing but adaptations of the organisms to survive in its habitat. Right. So when we try to define adaptations, adaptation can be defined it as any attribute of the organism, let it be morphological, physiological, behavioral, which enables the organism to survive and reproduce in its habitat. Right. We can take the example of kangaroo rats. Right. Kangaroo rats, they live in North American desert, so they are adapted to survive in desert conditions. Right. So let us talk about their adaptive features. Right. So adaptive features of kangaroo rat include, first of all its water requirement is met through fat oxidation. So these kangaroo rats, they do not need to drink water, right? All its water requirement is met through fat oxidation within its body. So when they burn fat within their body, water is produced, and that water is used for other biological processes. So they do not need to drink water. And then the second adaptive feature is they have the ability to produce concentrated urine, right? They have the ability to concentrate its urine. So this helps in conservation of water in their body. So these are the adaptive features of kangaroo rat, which makes them survive in desert conditions. Right? And when we talk about adaptations of desert plants, right? So desert plants, they have got thick cuticle on their leaf surfaces, right? Their stomata are sunken, which means stomata are arranged in deep pits, and they perform CAM photosynthetic pathway, crassulation acid metabolism pathway, right, in which their stomata remains closed during the day. And all these features helps the desert plants in conservation of water within itself, right? So they prevent water loss through transpiration process. We can take the example of opuntia, which is cactus, right? Opuntia is a desert plant. So opuntia, they do not have leaves. Their leaves are reduced to spines, which means there won't be any transpiration loss of water. Okay, and their stems are flattened, and stems, they carry out the photosynthesis process. Right? So these are the adaptive features of desert plants. Now, if we talk about adaptive features of organisms who live in colder climates, we can think about mammals of the colder climates. Right? So mammals which are found in colder climates, in polar regions, they have got short ears and limbs. Right? So they have got shorter ears and limbs, which prevents them from losing body heat through body extremities. We lose a lot of body heat through our ears and our limbs. Right? So mammals which are found in colder climates, they have got shorter ears and limbs, which is now called as Allen's rule. Right? And apart from that, mammals which are found in colder climates, they have got a blubber or thick layer of fat below their skin for insulation purpose. Right? For example, we can take the example of seal. Right? So seals, they have got thick layer of fat under their skin, which helps as which acts as insulator and prevents the loss of body heat to the environment. Okay, and apart from that, we also have got physiological adaptation, right? So these physiological adaptations, they help in quick response to stressful situations. For example, we can take the example of ourselves. If we move from plains to 3,500 meters altitude, right, we get something called altitude sickness, which is characterized by symptoms such as nausea, fatigue, and heart palpitations. And our body responds through acclimatization process. This acclimatization process is the body's solution to the problem of altitude sickness. Right? During acclimatization, what happens is our body increases our RBC count, red blood cell count. It decreases the binding affinity of the hemoglobin, and it also increases the breathing rate. So our body, through acclimatization process, overcomes the altitude sickness. Right? So this is a physiological adaptation. So we can say that people who live in high altitudes, like in areas like Ladakh, right, in higher areas like in mountains, right? So they have got all these characteristics, right? All these physiological adaptations to survive in high altitude. Okay, now regarding physiological adaptation, we have got 3 questions given in your textbook, right? These questions are, first one, there are microbes like archaebacteria that flourish in hot springs and deep sea hydrothermal vents where temperatures far exceed 100 degrees Celsius. How is this possible? So this is the first question. So the second question is, how do deep sea animals live under crushing pressures? So those animals which are found under deep sea, they live under very large pressure, right? And how do they survive under crushing pressures? Do they have any special enzymes? That is the second question. The third question is, how do fishes of Antarctic waters, very cold waters, manage to keep their body fluids from freezing? Right. So these are 3 questions which are asked in your question with regards to physiological adaptations. You have to find answers for that. Right. And lastly, we have got behavioral responses. Right. So those organisms who lack physiological ability to deal with environmental stresses, they show behavioral responses to cope with abiotic factors. Right. For example, we can take the example of desert lizards. Right. Desert lizards, they keep their body temperature constant by behavioral means, right, such as basking in the sun to warm up. When it's really cold, when it wants to warm up, the desert lizard, they bask in the sun. And when it gets too hot, right, so the desert lizard, they will move into shade or they will burrow into soil to cool down, right? So these are the behavioral responses, right? We can take the example of dogs panting. That is also a behavioral response. Through panting, they lose heat from their mouth, right? So behavioral responses are also a kind of adaptive features of organisms to survive in their respective environment. In the next video, we will talk about populations, right? So please read about populations. It is section 13.2, page number 226. Read about populations before you watch the next video. Thank you.